Hey, welcome to episode 181 of the Titanforge podcast. I'm Dranos, joined by Trell
Hello.
and Tettles.
Yo, what's up? We're back.
We are
Been a
back
little bit
indeed.
of a break.
Yeah, we took 2 weeks off. In the meantime, surely nothing has happened to our metagame. Let's let's walk back in here and survey the state of Mythic Plus.
Dude, you know the meme where they got the pizza and everything's on fire? That's how I feel whenever we stroll back in.
Yeah, this is
This is fine.
surely it's gonna be fine. So this week we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about 10.1.5. We're going to talk, of course, about Augmentation of Ochre. We'll talk about a Great Push as well, as that begins this weekend.
Yeah.
And we'll be back to dungeon episodes starting next week. Will be the plan here. But I think the elephant in the room is the meta and the Augmentation of Ochre. It's not just the Augmentation of Ochre though, right? There are several specs that are
Well,
involved in this. But
that's-
Augmentation
you're
may be the
referring to-
most.
you're
Yeah.
referring to Mythic Plus, right?
Yeah,
So
I guess we
Raid-
can talk. We'll start with Mythic Plus. We'll talk about Raid after.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, Tettles. How do you want to start by talking about what this patch has done for Mythic Plus?
I mean, so 10.1.5 came out. There was a couple of changes. First off, there was the mage rework. There was a few Holy Paladin changes. It wasn't necessarily like a full rework or anything, but it was like a couple of changes to talent strength functionality, how the class was playing. There was they call it a mage rework. There was a decent amount of mage changes. I don't think it was like a full rework as to like how any of the specs were functioning, but they did a couple of things to mages, just the class, like removing arcane power. They gave them, or not arcane power. They removed rune of power. They gave them like some utilities such as mass barrier. And then they reworked they changed them a little bit with how some of their interactions are working. And then Guardian Druid got a couple of buffs. I mean,
It was just talent rearranging for Guardian.
yeah,
Which is a buff,
Which
right?
ended up with huge buffs, yeah.
Yeah.
it's like a prot paladin. You guys remember prot paladin last season? How they didn't necessarily get like fully reworked, but a decent amount of their talents got rearranged. Then they got like one new class tree node with and then there was like, next thing you know, prot paladin was OP. Kind of similar situation to this one in 10.1.5. And then Augmentation of Ochre got released. And now if you look at the front page of Raider.io, all four of those specs that we talked about, or all four of those classes are at least seen, which is a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, this is the most egregious of a front page of Raider.io that I have seen. Gotta be going back for a really long time. Like when we think about some unbalanced seasons in the game's history, right? There's like Shadowlands or Battle for Azeroth season 2 or whatever, which they don't even have all the data from that. But this season had a lot of like double rogue runs that aren't showing up here, and triple rogue runs. But
Shadowlands season,
yeah, even
3
still,
was
like
really bad.
You can see Shadowlands 3. Okay, yeah, Shadowlands 3 was a Warlock Hunter DK. Yeah, so this is I guess pretty similar. Although here at least there's like 2 comps that are showing up on the front page compared to just one.
Oh, mage versus
the mage versus the Windwalker, which it's fair. That's not much better. I'll give you that. It's pretty close to as bad as right now, but right now is like, so right now on the front page there's one difference, which is one team is playing a Preservation of Ochre instead of a Holy Paladin, but other than that there's everything the same. Yeah. If you want to know, you have to go to the 307th best run. As of earlier today, I went and looked to find the first group that isn't using an Augmentation of Ochre, which is
oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh my god, dude,
That's
I
quite
hate that
something.
so much.
It is a journey.
Like Aug of Ochre, they came out. Okay, so I think that basically how we have this structured is I structured like we're gonna talk about average dungeon level, but I think that we'll just talk about augmentation because I think that makes the most sense with like where we are currently standing.
Okay.
They came out and then for Mythic Plus they immediately changed the metagame. Their damage by itself doesn't look like that insane. Like if you look at them in Warcraft logs, if you look at them inside of logs, their damage doesn't look like crazy or anything. But the level of keys that they allow you to do, whenever we talk about this season, we talked about how it was going to be super survivability focused. Damage is going to matter a lot less. And they bring 2 key levels worth of survivability increases with things like Group Rally. They have Twin Guardians Shield. They have Shifting Sands versatility. They have pretty much everything, and then on top of that, they do decent enough damage to where you're like, holy shit, this thing is so OP.
They also have 4% more health all the time, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
And a
group.
cheat death, and
Cheat death.
well, it's, they give the whole party the 4% more health, right? And then they rally
Yeah.
whenever they press scales.
plus the
Yeah,
rally, yeah. So it's like another priest buff for the group. They also have the shield from the talent that when they use their Breath of the Aeons, like at the end of their breath, everybody nukes the pack, and they also get like a big HP shield on themselves. They have
Yeah.
all kinds of good stuff.
the one from their Breath of Ian's shield, right? The
Mhm.
Chrono Ward.
I mean, they also have like Zephyr and Dispel and Cauterize. Like it's like a lot of stuff. Plus Drakthir Racial, like Tail Swipe and Wing Buffet are both just
and
incredibly
Upheaval
good
Nox.
utilities.
And upheaval, yeah.
Upheaval
Okay,
Nox are
okay.
Yeah.
The spec is ridiculous. Clearly, since we're just continuing to list things, but like
Well-
I don't want to necessarily just like list all their utility. And be like, oh, this is OP.
Yeah, you got to be careful because like I feel like if you go into this mode, and people go into this mode a lot, where you just start listing the utility of a spec, and any spec can sound insane if you start just like listing its utility.
Yes.
I think the thing is that it has a good utility kit, including some stuff that's pretty always like the Black Attunement health increase on the group that's just always up and then often really powerful is super strong. But then also they are just adding so much damage to the group, and they're adding so much damage to the group in CDs, right? Like here's
In crucial moments.
damage from logged runs, right? And this is augmentation is still not being correctly calculated on logs 100% accurately, right? Like there are still sources of augmentation bonus damage that can't be shown on logs, right? Augmentation gives a fire mage 3% more crit. That's 3% more hot streaks and heating ups, and those just can't be calculated and attributed correctly to the augmentation evoker. But even still, they're showing up as second highest on overall across logged M+ runs.
What I will say is, whenever like I'm looking at a lot of runs, especially in like the high end, you'll consistently see the augmentation evoker in third place for DPS. But whenever you like actively play with the augmentation evoker, and sometimes actually the aug will look like it's at replacement level. Like you could replace it with a subtlety rogue. It look like you could replace it with like an enhancement shaman or a moonkin or something like that.
Or warrior,
That's absolutely not the fucking case. You're absolutely never doing something like that. Like aug is giga broken.
I think even more broken than all of that is that it increases the throughput and survivability of the tank and healer. Like that alone is like 2 key levels worth of power. Like just from feeler crafting, the first time I played with Aug, I did like a 24, and I'd done like the same 24 the day before the patch, and it just felt like 3 keys easier, which makes a lot of sense because now all the highest keys are 3 levels higher on Ray.
Yeah, I mean I think that's been the big story, right? Is if you look at the this is
I fucking hate this.
the M+ title, and you can see when 10. So going up to 10.1.5, nice steady increase of 10 to 30 points per week, depending on the affix difficulty. The week 10.1.5 came out, 115 points. The score went up in EU, 100 in NA, 120 in Taiwan, and 115 in Korea as well.
Okay, and you have to factor this in. This is just a fortified week. You don't even have 2 key weeks worth of data. That shit went up an average of like 2.5 key levels on just fortified, right? Like that's 2.5 key levels for both fortified and tyrannical, but that probably is like 3.5 keys.
Now, to be fair, it was a very good fortified week, right? Like this is likely to be the best fortified week on the calendar. People's gear is getting better, right? It's normal for the title goes up, not down.
Myth
over the
track
season.
Myth track also came out.
Gear got better, but all of that doesn't account for quadrupling the gain here. A lot of that is from, and of course, I mean, you could just look at the front page and see the power is coming from this composition being just not remotely close to anything else.
I mean, Fire Mage and Aug together are just gross.
Yeah, it's
and Frost Mage too, honestly.
I did a key with Arcane as well, and that also works. It's you play Arcane. We played Arcane. We had our Augmentation Evoker, Talent. Where is it? Talent interwoven threads for just 10% static CDR, and line up their CDs with the Augmentation CD or with the Arcane shorter CDs. It wasn't better than
Okay.
fire, but it also worked. Also, just way
That's
better than
interesting.
anything else. You could be anything from like last patch.
I have a question. Since asks this in chat, actually, this is actually a pretty good question. Do you guys think it's better to release stuff like this on a 0.5 patch or an actual patch release which impacts raid? I want more stuff like this, but mid patch is wild for balance, because this is the second time we see that. Like, go and look at you can change the Vercel thing to look at
To season 1.
Yeah, to season 1.
Okay.
But and like you'll see something similar, but it's not 150 points.
Where even are we? Like, there's not
10.0.5, right?
10.0.5 was less gain than the week before 10.0.5.
Yeah. Okay. So
Here, right? It's
Yeah, this one felt a lot more impactful.
yeah, there the patch dates, and then there was like the Onyx Amulet or whatever, right? But yeah, you can see like nice flat or not a flat, but like a relatively reasonable chart. I guess for some reason I can't make this go back further to the start of the season or anything, but like get more weeks into this easily. But maybe I can screw around with it. Anyways, point being, yeah, this is different. However, like they're launching an entirely new spec, right? Which obviously is a cool thing to do. It does kind of suck that it has sort of invalidated the season up to this point, right? Like,
I hate that.
if you look at who's got score and who's got title, almost entirely this season it's going to come down to who has played this comp after this patch rather than who played before the patch. And to some extent, obviously, like, it's always true that later in the season matters more than earlier in the season, but the complete invalidation, I don't know, like maybe it would make sense to actually cut the season on a patch that you're going to do this big of a shakeup. Just cut the season here and then, do a title there and then do another title at the end of season or something. I'm not sure.
I just think this is the most imbalanced the game has been from a Mythic Plus perspective in a very long time, and the fact that it happened in a 0.5 patch is very sad. I'm not a big fan of this one.
I mean, for me, I feel like it's mostly positive. I think the only bad thing is like the title. Yeah, like people that played really hard up until the patch, their work kind of gets a little invalidated. But I personally like the shakeup in gameplay. I like the meta change. Maybe it's because I play several classes, but I don't know. How do you feel about it, Drynos?
Well, I don't like going from a meta where you could play multiple different comps to one where you can only play one. Now, it's not like last patch, like 10.1 was especially well balanced, but it was okay, right? Like, you had to play Shadow Priest in at least 5 of the dungeons, and most teams just played it in 8, right? Your tank was probably a DHR bear, right? In almost all groups. Your healer was a Holy Paladin. Those last 2 spots were negotiable, though, right? And there were differences that people...
And depending on the dungeon, like, you could even make an argument for a dungeon specifically like Brackenhide Hollow where you're running like a full melee cleave
right,
comp
like
or something like that too. Whereas now it's like,
here's one of the weeks from like earlier in the season. I just changed the affixes to one of the earlier in the season weeks, right? Like, I like playing seasons like this where you can do you do these things, you do these things, right? Like, you can do all kinds of
a lot of different
comps,
healer diversity
right?
because of it too.
Well, and I think this is from earlier in the season. I just clicked at random one of these earlier weeks. It did end up moving towards more of the kind of, and to some extent, right? Like, as the season gets longer, people sort of figure out what the good stuff is, and there is narrowing down to that. But I think that's a good example of like the fact that happened within one day this season. Was everybody identified the broken comp and was everybody agreed on it that quick? Goes to show that like this is especially bad, right? And that's the important thing, right? Is like the issue is not that there's a new best thing. The issue is if the best thing is like enough better than the second best thing, it's a lot worse to actually try and play that second best thing and be able to
an interesting point.
Do content.
I think it's worth noting that the augmentation, I think it all revolves around augmentation, right? It's like a whole new role. It's the only one of its kind right now. That's what's like really driving these key levels to go up mainly. But like for tanks, augmentation actually kind of made tanks all universally more takeable in keys at like the 28, 29 level. Like, you can see Pro Warriors doing 29s. They have a harder time, obviously, than bears, but I think the only reason why we see most bears in the front 2 pages is because Bear also got like that extra bump at the same time.
I don't think if we're just looking at the tank meta in isolation for Mythic Plus, it doesn't seem like it's too bad. It seems like realistically you could play a lot of different tanks and do a
You
lot
can play
of
like
different
3 or
stuff.
4.
I think that, I mean, you're going to see Guardian Druid in spades, but a lot of that's due to Mark of the Wild plus like into the wildfire healing. Like it, and they do provide a lot of additional like off healing and value in that regard. But it's not that the other
really
tanks are
safe
bad.
too.
Yeah, I mean,
I think you can see every tank in the top doing a 29 except for Prop Paladin. Just a cursory look through, it seems like all the specs are represented other than that, which is
crazy.
Yeah,
that is crazy that Prop Paladin is actually probably the worst tank now coming out of last season. I can't believe it.
Yeah, but so I agree with that, and a lot of that is also like specs like Brewmaster love the flat armor that Augmentation is going to give you, right? Which is a spec that I think needed some of the most defensive help in high keys. So
absolutely, and it raises DK's effective health too, so they can just survive a couple of key levels higher. It's just all around really nice as a tank player. I mean, all of us love Augmentation, I think. But I think it's more impactful on like the mage situation, like we were talking about. Like when you play with a sub rogue instead of a mage, or a moonkin instead of a mage, it's pretty noticeable if they're like similar skill level.
If you okay, so this is obviously like anecdotal, and we making the list. But whenever I went and updated the Wowhead tier list for DPS for Mythic Plus this week, we went from one spec in S tier for DPS, which was just Shadow Priest, and then we just slammed Augmentation and Fire Mage into S with it, and it was just like, and then we just moved around a couple of other things. But like before, there were so many different A tier options that you could fill out your second and third slot with, and now it's like maybe you can change your third slot, but you probably shouldn't.
I think realistically, like it's almost like the best S tier specs, the Augmentation, the Shadow, the Holy Paladin, especially, are so good that it's not like the other specs that were in like A tiers or whatever have gotten worse relative to the content. It's just the key level has gone up by 3, and that's because those specs are like SSSSS plus. So I actually do think that there's a very healthy metagame that is just under the surface here, right? It's like when you've got a lake with like an oil spill on the top, and if you could just get that layer of oil off the top, then all of a sudden it's all good again. But right now there's
like I've been plugging a lot. I've been doing that a lot lately in general, but like I did some 27s and even some 28s last week from just LFG gamers. And I did some of those 27s with the Disc Priest. I had a lot of those without Mage even. I think the meta is actually really close, like you said.
Yeah, I think that there's still like 12 good DPS specs that are just waiting to not have an Augmentation and a Shadow Priest and the Mage like lock a spot each to be able to start seeing some play. So I'm hopeful that a few nerfs to these top specs will bring us back to a good metagame. I'm a little bit worried though, because if we move to a world of like this comp times a bunch of 29s and 30s, and then this comp gets nerfed, like okay, maybe the best comp now will be something else, but it's like those keys that were set by this pre-nerf comp, like, are you going to actually be able to overtake them? I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously Mage needed a nerf. But
Mage
like,
already had Mage, so Mage and Holy Paladin have already gotten nerfed as well. They're still the best, but they have already gotten nerfed this reset.
There's a problem that I see where right now, even like all of those A tier specs that we had last patch are fighting only for the Mage's spot. And Shadow Priest is weird because I don't think that Shadow Priest inherently needs a nerf on their damage, but I think that like this season was just designed so well for that spec to shine. Like Mind Soothe is broken, like mandatory in a lot of dungeons, and Mass Dispel is mandatory in a lot of dungeons, and so that spec is required for, let's say, 5 out of the 8 dungeons. And so obviously it's difficult to nerf Priest because on their own merits and just looking at their damage, it's like they don't need a nerf, but like how are you supposed to bring them back in line without changing something more drastically? So I would be more I would be opposed almost to changing how Shadow Priest works. I think that like Augmentation, I think that that's the one I'm looking at, is like this thing, something has to happen.
I think with Shadow, you want to target the abilities that make Mass Dispel feel mandatory. Like the difference between having and not having Mass Dispel should be like, oh, nice, rather than, oh no, I can't complete this dungeon. Which it does feel, at least in like 3 dungeons to me. If you're playing without Mass Dispel, you just like minus 3 key levels or 2 key levels or something.
Dude, I don't even know what you would do to nerf Aug Evoker, because it's not even just their damage contribution that's the issue. It's like there's a lot that's going on with what they've done with this support style DPS that they call it, right? Where it's like, holy shit, this thing provides a ton.
Yeah, I mean, you can like I think nerfing the damage is a good place to start in M+, because you can at least do that until it stops being the best. Like at some point, if you nerf their damage enough, it'll stop being the best choice, right? And you can easily nerf their damage in M+ without nerfing their raid damage, because a lot of their I mean, you can just change the percent on this thing, and it doesn't on closest clutch mates, which is their M+ passive. If you just lower this, eventually they will. Like, the question though becomes, do we want to balance augmentation by making it do less damage than every other spec but have more utility? Or are we going to try and have a world where it's balanced, doing the same amount of damage as the other specs? And I agree, it's like, it's hard to imagine if it does the same damage as the best specs, that it's not just going to be mandatory, because it is bringing that permanent health increase. It's bringing all these extra utility buttons. It's synergizing with everybody's burst cooldown so nicely, and making the dungeon so much easier.
Here's the thing too, it amps the best DPS in the game by
Right.
a lot also. So like if you have a DPS that is like identifiably the best, it's as good as bringing a second copy of them, except you get better utility in a lot of instances because you don't have overlapping utility.
Yeah.
It's like, if they nerf Fire Mage and Frost Mage, like some other culprit will come up and Augmentation will still be just as good.
It'll be Balanced Druid or some other bullshit, right? Like it's just like another spec will like fall into line. It's like Ellie Shaman or Enhancement Shaman or fucking whatever, Sub Rogue. Probably not Sub Rogue, because like you have to eat a PI somehow, but like a lot of like those specs are good.
Yeah,
it's just like they're not.
You do want like a 2-minute spec that likes PI. But
yeah.
There are a lot of those specs. It is bad news if you're something like an Outlaw Rogue or something that just doesn't take PIs, doesn't have burst windows, right? And because like the way that augmentation works, it synergizes really well with stuff that can do big damage into those Breath of Ian's windows, which also happens to be the specs that synergize well with power infusion, right? So there's sort of this positive feedback loop going on. But yeah, there are like 10 specs that's true for.
It's crazy that subtlety to me does so much damage if it's piloted well right now, and we're not seeing it be played. It like there is a lot of specs that you look at that, and it's a very similar situation where it's like, wow, that spec does a lot. That's sad that you can't see them be played anymore.
I think Disc Priest actually opens up that slot for a sub or an extra DPS. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. If Disc is good enough to get
well, because then
off the block,
and then you can still put the PI on somebody else that's your third DPS or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think there's just like a big combo of like both S Priest being absolutely required in like a regular comp, and then also augmentation at the same time. If one of those two went, I think we'd have a lot more open meta, but it's just like all the stars aligned for that this season. How do you guys feel about the like having a support role in Mythic Plus? I find it really fun. I think it's very interesting now.
Yeah, I think the gameplay of it is. Ooh, we're back. Okay, chilling. Discord call. That's good. I think the gameplay of it's good.
Thank God Discord.
I'm not like there's a lot of communication between. So I've been pushing a little bit of keys this season since this came out, because big opportunity for a Fodom reroller to shine, and whenever they make something this broken, right? So I'm playing Bear, and I got the full. We've got the full Exodia comp, assembled and geared. So it's been like a hot knife through butter against the keys so far, and yeah, I will say, like, there's been a lot of communication among my group about like talking about when they're going to send their cooldowns and lining them all up with each other, which I think has been pretty cool.
The healer communication too, like using the augmentations rallies and rescue shields and all that, and Zephyr between all the healer cities. I love that communication. It's very cool.
For me, like a support spec is kind of how I would want to would want my personal role to be in like a Mythic Plus run. Is I would want to play like a more support role to like how the dungeon is performing, but like a lot of the stuff that's attached to what they've done with augmentation makes me a bit concerned. So first off, like them not showing damage on the damage meters and like their actual amount of contribution, I take heavy issue with. I think that is a problem.
We've seen the screenshots of the people getting kicked or whatever. Yeah.
Why is Evoke controlling 30k
It's not only
DPS?
just that, but like they said that they were going to have hook-ins for how the damage was going to be allocated, and then they just walked that back in like a Kalamazoo interview like a week before like Augmentation came out. And I think that like if you're going to continue to have support specs, you have to be able to appropriately tell like what your contribution level is, not only just in logs but also in like damage meters and stuff like that. Just with how the game is played. I understand like it's a noble thing for Blizzard developers to not want the game to be played like that. It's unfortunately a bit too late. We're not in 2011 anymore, where people allow you to play like garbage and get over it. There is a desire for knowledge for like what is optimal with like the game, and like there is a desire for like instant feedback as to like how you're performing. And I think that like that with support specs is, if they're going to continue forward with them, that needs to be addressed. I do think that they're actually kind of cool, but I don't think how they're designing them, how they've designed Augmentation, I think has been a problem.
Yeah, I think the gameplay's cool. I think that, so if we were to move to a world of like 1 tank, 1 healer, 1 support, 2 DPS, and that's like a mandatory comp, I do think there's a problem with 1 support spec existing in that space, right? I think
that's what I was gonna say.
Like they need to make more support specs if that is the goal. But I wouldn't inherently be opposed to that, because I've been finding the gameplay with an Augmentation Evoker in the group to be reasonably good. I will say that gameplay has been good, but we haven't seen it yet with Augmentation being balanced, right? Like, are we just going to have that support spec be, or that support slot in the group be overpowered relative to the DPS slots, right? Like, is it just bringing more damage, more utility than the other DPS, and the trade-off is you can only have one of them because they buff other DPS?
I don't know how this is supposed to be balanced, because their damage is based around other people's ability to be able to do damage. Like,
you can do it, right? Like the Augmentation is sort of balanced in that way right now, right? Where it's like, it's really good, but you can only bring one of them. It's 1 role, 1 slot, right? And if you just make 5 specs that's true for all 5 of them, like maybe that's fine and that works out okay. But the thing is that we don't know yet is if they made Augmentation actually just competitive for one of the 3 DPS slots, would that gameplay be fun, right? Would people enjoy playing Augmentation if the contribution was dramatically lower than it is right now, which is what it would need to be balanced? And I don't know the answer to that yet. But also I don't want to live in a world where we're waiting years for the next support spec and we just have Augmentation hard locked until then.
So this kind of reminds me of what, like, coming into Legion, Blizzard reworked Discipline Priest to be 75% of a healer and 50% of a DPS. And that shit was not played. And then they buffed it a little bit, and then that shit was the only healer you ever saw. that I think that's like kind of in line with how Augmentation is, where Augmentation is, I don't know, let's say 95 or 90% of a DPS and, I don't know, 150% of the utility of another class. And then it's like, okay, yeah, that thing's going to be seen over all DPS. That thing is insane. I like the idea. I think that they, for all of the pure DPS, I think they could probably rework like 1 specialization to be a support. But like, if they're really committed to changing like the paradigm of how the game functions, they could do something like that.
I can't think of any spec. Like, I don't think there's any spec you can actually, like, the hypothetical of like, oh yeah, they should change some specs to be support specs sounds good, but the minute you actually propose like, hey, let's turn Balance Druid into a support spec, all of a sudden there's gonna be a bunch of Balance Druids that are like, no, wait, don't do that. Like, we like how our spec works. Right? Let's change. Like, you name any spec, there people name Enhancement, Disc,
Outlaw,
whatever you want.
Roll the buffs, the buffs.
Like any of those things. Actually, Outlaw, you could give Crimson Vials in PvP as well, so sort of there's some precedent there. But yeah, anytime you actually like name a spec and suggest that one becomes a sports spec, most of the people who play that spec aren't going to be happy with that change.
I don't know, dude. I just don't know what the future of this looks like. I feel like Augmentation's in a spot where this thing is going to either be criminally overpowered or just nerfed to the point where you don't see them.
Well, because the problem with Augmentation is that there is an effectiveness multiplier on it that is really high in a good group, but like in a lower end group right now, it's not super broken. It's just good, right? So if you nerf that spec by 30% and it stops being super broken in a high-end group, it's also going to stop being good in a low-end group. And that spec is aimed at players that mostly, like, the goal of that spec, in my opinion at least, is to make the game more approachable, more accessible, have there be a spec you can play where you're not needing to look at your DPS meters or have the stress of the really hard healing and tanking rolls, right? Like, the augmentation is a godsend for players that want to be able to do keys with their friends without having to shoulder all the responsibilities of either looking at the like optimizing their damage or tanking or healing, which are both really hard.
I would love to play like an Aug Evoker and then just like shot call a bunch of Mythic Plus stuff. I feel like that's like a pretty good role to have, right? Where you're playing an Augmentation Evoker. Your rotation, it matters. Like keeping up Ebb and Might uptime is like actually very important, and like optimizing it is actually super important. But if you fuck up your rotation, it's not the same thing. Like fundamentally, it is a little bit different.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really hard question to answer for Mythic Plus. So I'm excited to see what they do next. They've opened a big can of worms here, and I'm not confident that I have the right answer for what they should do next.
The future is bright for Raid, though. So pivoting a little bit. For Raid, I feel like this is fixable. I think it is very good at Raid right now, but I feel like this is fixable.
It's so weird as well, because there is an element to Augmentation's gameplay that I believe is not especially enjoyable for the more kind of casually players, that doesn't exist in M+, but that does exist in Raid, which is selecting your Ebb and Might targets, right? In M+, it just hits your whole group. In Raid, you actually have to like target and either prescience or be close to whoever you want to affect, or just let Ian take the wheel and have it buff whoever it's going to buff and lose a lot of damage.
Take the wheel.
So it's an interesting dynamic that the spec has in Raid. It was certainly so. Last week there were some players. Biceps Pump set up a little raid of 70 Augmentation Evokers or whatever, and 2 DKs. They tactical nuked Kazara from orbit. So in response to this, Blizzard changed it so that each player can only be affected by up to 4 Augmentation Evokers, which makes this slightly less. It makes this particular thing not work anymore. Although my understanding is he's still trying to set up a run with sort of a pyramid scheme of Augmentation Evokers buffing Augmentation Evokers that then buff the DKs. But that'll be a lot less effective than this would have than this particular run was. But maybe still really good for padding or whatever. But right, like this, you can see they deleted Kazara in 20 seconds or whatever. Like that's that this was just straight up busted, right? Like this was the best way. It was not as good as the Windwalker thing, but it was pretty close.
I will say that at least Augmentation for Raid, it does not occupy a mandatory slot on its own merits, or like with like raid buffs, it does not occupy a mandatory slot. Now it is very good.
So that's the thing.
Very overtuned, but
is based on its current tuning. How many Augmentation Evokers would you expect to see in the Race to World First? Like, for me, it's like between 2 and 4.
9 or none.
9 or none. I like that.
9?
I mean,
well, 9 would be the optimal number, wouldn't it?
Well, each player can only be affected by 4 augmentation buffs, right?
Okay, so 7.
Well, even with 7, that's kind of cursed, right? Like, do you have enough DPS players that you're not going to be wasting? Because you have 6 tanks and healers, so you have 14 slots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you had 7 non-augmentations and 7 augmentations, I guess you could divide it. But it'd be very hard to make sure it landed on the right people.
Well, okay, yeah, clearly it'd be super cringe, but like the idea is so bad. I don't think you would just certainly not see 7, but well,
maybe on like one boss where you need like one very specific damage profile, and you had like 5 insane DPS players that are just getting giga buffed for their damage profile. But like I feel like in general we're gonna see 1 to 2, even if they're really good.
Is the raid utility really that good though? Like, I mean, it's not bad, right? It's just not insane.
I mean, they bring the attunements and the Zephyrs and stuff, but a lot of those are like 5-player buffs.
Those are party-wide buffs.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, that's still good. Like Zephyr is still something you think about that's like, oh, that's nice when you have an evoker. But I will say that I don't think they really occupy like a mandatory raid buff slot for raid. it is more a case of like, given current tuning, and even given like after a reasonable nerf tuning, there's a good chance you would still want to fill out your non-raid buff spots with several augmentation evokers, which it's a bit of a question.
Yeah.
Like I and top guilds obviously are not answering whether the answer to this yet, but of like how feasible it actually is to use this on progression and to optimize it on progression. But my guess is that if there was a race to world first today, you would play 4 augmentation evokers, and those 4 would like all be buffing the demo locks or whatever, like the 2 biggest pumpers, and then having their other 2 targets be a little bit less reliably done, but you'd maybe try and do some positioning to make it work out and have them also affect good people. And my guess is that would be the easiest way to melt the raid. But
I think you're right. Like, as of today, it probably would be like 4 average or at the max. But like I feel like with some changes, they'll do something to nerf Aug, like maybe a tiny bit or something as they're trying to feel it out. I think we're going to end up seeing 1 to 2, maybe 3 next raid or something like that.
I could see you bringing 0. Like I feel like there is a world where they get nerfed a little bit more.
Oh yeah,
and they're not as powerful as like another another stackable DPS. Like the 3rd copy of a warlock ends up being better, and you just don't see an aug or something like that. Like the 3rd copy of a mage ends up being better, and you just don't see an augmentation evoker.
Do you think there's ever a world where you just like drop all the physical damage classes and you just play Aug instead?
I mean, Battle Shout is already affecting a very small amount of the.
Same with Windwalker.
Right? Like, Windwalker's affecting even less than Battle Shout, right? Because Battle Shout's affecting your DKs and your like rogues or whatever that do a lot of magic damage but scale off attack power. Hunters, I think, are the Hunters, DPS, Shaman are the classes that are most endangered as a result of the amount of free raid spots potentially going down in a world where augmentation isn't nerfed.
Hunter is so fucking bad; it is unbelievable. I do not understand how whenever they were picking candidates for 10.1.5 reworks, they didn't just like immediately look at Hunter and be like, this class needs infinite dungeon utility and like some raid utility. Like they need a reason to be brought, and they do not have it.
Yeah, it's tough out there. It's tough out there for Hunter raid spots for future tiers. Yeah, definitely something that I think Hunters. Shamans, I mean, so the good news is there's a lot of specs that kind of have a raid buff. So 1 copy is pretty safe, right? Like 1 rogue, Atrophic Poison, you can't cut that, right? 2 paladins, Red Aura, Diva Aura, you can't cut that. The warrior, the Battle Shout, arguably cuttable. The monk, the Mystic Touch, maybe cuttable.
It depends on how
cuttable.
good. It depends on like how good the other ones are, right? Like if the warrior is good, then the monk is also good. Like
if you're playing the warrior, you're definitely, or if you're playing the monk, you're definitely playing the warrior. Yeah, I guess not necessarily vice versa.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is close to a reasonable equilibrium if they go through and they make sure that like every class and spec that is left on the sidelines right now, if they focus on giving all of them something, I think it'll be okay. Like, I think a world of 40 specs that each have some compelling reason to be brought to raid is okay. I would rather have all those raid buffs gone and have the playing field be leveled. But 40 out of 40 having something good is much better than 30 out of 40, right? 30 out of 40 is just such bad news for those 10 specs, those hunter specs and stuff. So,
and I wouldn't even hate if it was just homogenized down to where the 10 had something that the other 30 had, like similar things. Like that's totally fine. It's just it does create a left out phenomenon where why am I bringing this? This shit isn't participating even at all.
Yeah.
And even like Death Knight. Okay, so I think that Death Knight also has a fundamental issue, but you still need a Death Knight on your Mythic raid roster. Like if you're going through, I think that you still need a DK on your raid roster because there are 1 or 2 bosses per raid tier where you want the Death Knight, you want the grips or whatever, and so that's still valuable. And but I do think that they also have a problem where it's like they're not mandatory, so they get left out a lot because of it. I don't know.
Also, DK just has a really good damage profile and AMZ on top of that. But yeah, they're definitely like less expendable than shamans or monks for sure.
I also hate how difficult it makes recruiting new players. Because say your demon hunter retires, you're not looking to recruit the best player, you're looking to recruit a demon hunter.
Yeah.
Or you're internally promoting somebody to a demon hunter.
promoting is as one word for what happens
Congratulations
when
on
you
your
force
raid
somebody to
spot.
play Demon Hunter.
It's
Yeah.
like, you either get a Demon Hunter or you get the spot that's in your raid that has a good flex player
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah. Which, I mean, to be fair, like, it's good that it's valuable to be a multi-classer. Like, that's fine. That I don't have a problem with multi-classing being rewarded. It always has been and always will be. But I do think that the game would be better if it was a little bit more bring the player and a little bit less bring the class. Which,
It is really heavily bring the class right now.
Yeah, it's as somebody who benefits from that. I've played 6 different classes the last 6 tiers. I wish it wasn't like that. All right. I think that's a good overview of what we missed, what happened in the last 2 weeks. We picked a eventful 2 weeks to miss.
So, have you guys felt about power creep in the game so far? Like offensively, defensively, utility wise? It feels like every single rework they give to classes, the classes just give up nothing and show back up with more than they left with. And I'm like, what is this?
That's true.
I don't know how. Okay. This isn't like it's just a direct attack on mages. Again, I think that this happened with like Ret Paladin. Okay, Ret Paladin needed stuff, but like this happened with Ret Paladin. This happened with Brot Paladin. How the hell did Mage get Mass Barrier? Like it's just like I see them show back up with Mass Barrier. I'm like, how the fuck did that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting because the talent system, in theory, is good when there's like difficult choices that have value in different situations that you're making a pick between.
Yes.
But in practice, everybody likes their talent tree when they don't have to make those choices, right? Like if you have 40 good talents and 30 talent points, that actually feels like people celebrate when there's a rework that comes out that gives them more talent points, right? Or that bakes in some of those things. And that leads to stuff like the new mage rework where you just have enough points to get access to like, you know, mass barrier. And to be fair, okay, there's mass invis on this talent node, but you just always take mass barrier, right? And you can get this ice block
It's situational.
DR thing. Yeah, I mean, I think the best example of one where they kind of made it actually interesting choices is maybe the Brewmaster tree, where you now have the choice node between like Yu'lon's Grace and Diffuse Magic. I think is an example of like a choice node where there's actually 2
well, you're never picking
choices
that
or
as a
something like
Windwalker monk.
Yeah.
No,
So
what's
obviously,
funny about that is like these new talents are actually useless for Windwalker and Mistweaver.
yeah.
What are you picking that except for as a Brewmaster monk?
The dodge chance. Well, no, I mean Yu'lon's Grace is potentially reasonable for certain types of rot damage, magic rot damage, but the dodge chance that's just on the monk class tree is definitely pretty funny for Windwalkers and Mistweavers. Yeah. But I guess my point is, it seems like the interesting talents, like they can make interesting talents on choice nodes, but it seems like all of the reworks have kind of cut down the amount of interesting talent choices that exist because there's 2 different nodes at different spots in the tree, and you can't get both of them, right? Like that style has basically all the reworks have moved away from that and have been celebrated because of it, I think.
I feel like the Prop Paladin rework actually just enabled you to take like 40 different builds in Mythic Plus that season. Like I had a different build for every single dungeon on both Fort and Trample. So I had like 20 different builds or 16 different builds, math.
And substantially different choices in there.
Yeah, I was like probably floating 4 points between the builds consistently, and they were all different. It was pretty good. The bear one is a little bit less free flowing than that was. I think the bear rework is basically locked in. I mean, we haven't played it long enough to really know, I guess, so it may diverge a little bit as we go, but I can't speak for Mage or Og or Mage Pal though.
I've tried a couple of different bear builds, like doing, and there's some interesting, in theory, the bottom of this talent tree offers some interesting and competitive choices, but it does seem like, you take Raise, you take
pretty much just go
Incarn,
left side of it.
Yeah, it's I tried like a no Incarn, no Raise build, and it was not better. It was not particularly close. So
it just feels so weird whenever they just will rework a class, and the next thing you know, they show back up and they have all of the utility, and then they're losing nothing. It's just like, what?
Yeah. I guess Paladin is maybe a good example of like there are still some your final few points. You have a couple of interesting choices, right? Like you're choosing between a few possible things you can move the points between, but
well, for me on Prop Pally, it was actually the class tree changes
Yeah,
Or
that's fair. I mean,
most
especially in M
free
plus, right? You have a couple of different talents that you're opting between in different
Yeah.
situations, which is good.
I do think they did a better job with the prop heli rework talent wise like that. Like the Guardian tree or the class tree for Guardian still has these problems where you got to spend 3 points just to get a dispel.
Oh, dude.
Like that is so awful.
Yeah,
But
it's nasty actually. The how much you give up to take dispel on Guardian, and how few flexible points there are in this tree as well, right? Like it is a very locked in tree. But it's weird because, like, if they just gave you more of what you wanted, it would still be a locked-in tree, but it would just feel better, right? And that's what people, like, it's not actually that the amount of choice is going up. It's just that you can, like, when they give you everything that you want, then people are happy. I don't know. I feel like choice nodes are the thing I'm advocating for, though, right? Like, I think they should just put more good choice nodes where there are 2 items that are both good that you want both of them.
They're bad at restricting the
fair.
amount of points, but they should be more utilizing, I think, choice nodes, especially for like high profile utility buttons.
Or maybe I'm wrong about, like, maybe it's just better to just give everybody everything they want and not, like, for me, I like it when there's interesting hard choices and I can't have everything that I want, but the way that it happens on a talent tree through point restriction feels a lot worse than when you are just making a choice on a choice node. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the power creep has definitely been, like, the reworked classes, the reworked specs have been better than the, not just this most recent patch, right? This most recent patch, they reworked Paladin and Mage, and obviously those are, and Druid to a lesser extent, and obviously those specs are insane right now. But even going back to previous ones, right, there was the Rep Paladin, the Shadow Priest, right? Like, those reworks ended up making those specs really, really, really good when they got reworked as well, so...
Next, you know, it's Rogue.
That Rogue coming soon, any day now. That Rogue rework, it's on the way.
I don't know how they're gonna make Rogue more OP than they currently are, but I'm sure they'll find a way.
You gotta trust, it's coming.
I do think if they keep regularly doing this, it's really healthy for the game because it keeps people, one, hopeful for their own specs to be hit by it at some point, and 2, it's just like nice to try these rework specs with like increased power and options, and you can just see like the good work that's being done constantly.
This new talent system is a lot more interesting, at least, than the old one. So I'm glad that they've done it.
Yeah, I do think that I'm a little bit worried we're gonna kind of enter that sort of, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh power creep or whatever, where it's like just the most recently released thing is the best thing, and then the next most recently released thing is, and then the next thing is, right? And it's just like, it's just always whatever the new thing is the best, which I think would be worse than having there be a little bit more stability. But, you know, it's better to have the new stuff be a little bit too good than a little bit too bad, probably, right? Like, you don't want the rework to come out and have everybody feel like they made their spec worse. I
agree.
I think there probably should. I mean, hopefully there's just nerfs coming soon, right? Like, hopefully
their tuning has been bad. Their tuning is bad on this patch. Their tuning last patch was sparse, but
it was not bad on the classes and specs. I mean, like, the biggest problem was Mass Dispel, and that's not an easy. You don't solve that as a priest designer, right? You solve it as a dungeon designer.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I think that, like, I think that the tuning of this one has just been like, what the fuck.
Yeah. I don't know. Again, like, it has only been out for a week and a half. If there is a good set of changes that comes out next reset, the reset after, this could still be a really fun patch for the remainder of the patch. Even if there's not, and there's only one good comp, it's still a pretty fun comp to play. The dungeons are still reasonably fun, but, like, it does suck to have, you know, 35 out of 40 specs on the sidelines. So I hope they address that. And I'm confident that if they do, there is a lot of potential in the specs that aren't currently being brought, which is good.
I can't believe they turned 15 specs into 5, though. That one is a real thinker.
All right, let's move on to our tip of the week segment. My tip of the week is that the first time you complete one of the time rifts each week, you will get an item that you can use to buy a 402 piece of gear. And that piece of gear can be catalyzed. And if you catalyze it at 402, you can then upgrade it to 415 and get both the Raid Finder and the normal transmogs for your, because when you do that upgrade, you can get those transmogs. And Raid Finder and normal transmogs, at least for me personally, are the ones that I have the least of. So
Wow.
it's a really
That-
good hack. So
You somehow turned that into a transmog tip. I'm so impressed.
Well, do you know that
started off as like a really good gearing tip?
Yeah, it's good too. Hey, you want some 424 tier or whatever? Obviously that's good too, sure. But what's really cool is that it gives you the Mog. We love all the different Mogs. And speaking of Mog as well, there is a new feature in the game, transmog tracking. You can track your Mog in as like a quest objective now. If you go in game and you like right click on a Mog that you don't have or shift click it, it'll track it like it's a quest. And you can go and actually like look at this, right? Like it tells you like, oh, the boss drop or whatever, or like, oh, here's the vendor that sells this. So, it's a good time.
Oh,
It's a good time to be a transmog
awesome.
hunter.
okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So,
I don't think I could.
but I guess my main tip is if you want the normal or the LFR Mogs from Aberrus for a certain class, just do 1 time rift per week on that class, and you get a free item to buy you this 402 piece, and then catalyze it and upgrade it, and bang. Sets completed, very minimal pain compared to the normal LFR Mog transmog farming. That is quite painful. All right, Trell, what is your tip of the week?
Mine's coming off hot because I just lost a member of my group to this in the most recent dungeon before the podcast. But fervent strikes, which are basically tank attacks that hit nearby players if the tank is out of range, typically. That's like what we've been calling them since BFA from Metal Desire, if anyone remembers the actual ability fervent strike. Those can happen on storming on basically like any mob that has a tank attack, because if you're Z-axis at all, they just have a chance of ferventing a nearby player. So every time you get hit by a tornado, you're kind of rolling the dice on your group's lives until that gets fixed at some point. They used to fix fervent strikes back in Shadowlands, like season 3. They just suddenly wiped them all out, and that was like a huge victory for the community. But these days, there's quite a few that have been running rampant, so it's good to be aware of those.
Yeah, it's your Holy Paladin that is likely to suffer as a result of this as well, because most of the rest of your group at least can play at range.
Yeah, they're all ranged right now.
So I think a good person to be aware of this as well is the Holy Paladin, to know which packs you should just stay out of range of, if especially on Storming Week.
It's also just good to know because you can just like see it happening and hodge it if you're the H-Pal. Or if you're another member of the group, you're one of the ranged players, you can like send something to stop whatever is casting it. It's just good to know about.
All right, Tattles, looks like we've got 5 tip clips of the week from you or something. Several clips of the week. Okay,
it's
3.
It's only 3.
These are Augie or Evoker tips? Clips?
Yeah, so since everybody's playing with or as an Augmentation Evoker, I decided that it was good to add in some skips or tips with like Wormstone or ways that you can jump around as augmentation. So this first one comes from Twix and Freehold. This allows you to start the pig RP early with your group. Now, the 100-yard range on Wormstone here, it's a bit finicky. So you're going to have to make sure that like the person that you put it on is a bit close to you. So you see him walk up, and then the person is also close to him whenever he activates the Wormstone, but he is able to make it back. But that can help you start the pig RP a little bit early. And now I have one slightly less useful tip, but it's still not bad.
So you have to burn your Breath of Ians for this, which is pretty
you
big.
You get the Rod Hexers into the boss.
Okay, that's good though. Yeah.
So it's
This is a good one. This cuts a pull out of Brackenhead.
Okay. All right, I like that. That's pretty cool. That one comes from Cass. We'll have all the links to all these clips in the description and stuff. Or if you're listening to this podcast and you want to watch the clips later,
you could Wormstone back too if you want to.
Yeah, the Wormstone is pretty OP. And then here's the last Wormstone abuse, which
have you seen this one?
Yeah, this is sweet.
This is awesome.
This is the Treemouth Wormstone out. The best part about this is you can do this twice, because you can have the other Wormstone wielder do it when they get sucked in, right? So, crazy value.
Yeah,
Wormstone.
I think for that one you want to pre-cast it. I haven't done it yet, but you like start casting right before you get eaten, and it finishes shortly after, and then it ports you out.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you do it that the cast finishes after Treemouth's cast finishes, but as long as that's true, I think that's
it's like bubbling out.
good.
It's like pressing bubble out.
Whatever.
Right. Just ends the shield insta, and you get to keep damaging the boss.
Mm-hmm.
All right, some good clips there. Good finds. All right, up next, we'll talk a little bit about the Great Push, the esports that will be going on for the next several weekends. We have Group A coming up this weekend.
Holy shit, Group A, man.
Featuring Perplexed, Direwolves, FSY, Mandatory, Skyline, and the Greg Push, which...
What a group.
5 of those 6 names I recognize. Then there's the Greg Push out there as well, which they were rocking like an Ellie Shaman in qualifiers, right? So
yeah, they're rocking Ellie Shaman in every single key. I don't know what they're gonna do, but they're gone.
I think they've rolled into a bit of a group of death here, though. This is some nasty customers that they're running into.
Did Mandatory just like sack after they got the 29 freehold and they like had good times? I think that's the only reason that they ended up in this group. Yeah.
I don't know.
Probably. I think a lot of teams like mine actually like you get the 29 freehold and then you're thinking, okay, like surely they don't do higher than 30. Let's go spend the rest of our time in Ultimate trying to like get good at the actual game, because freehold is a very gimmicky strat and you can't even do that strat in the cup. So you might as well have like spent your practice time / time trial time in Ultimate if you could.
Yeah.
So maybe that backfired for them like it did us. Like they could have been top 3, I'm sure, if they spent more time in freehold.
So just for those who weren't paying attention, the 2 time trial dungeons were, yeah, like Charles said, Ultimate and freehold. And there was a very interesting strategy in freehold. And it's one that you might not have thought of, and it resulted in Harlan's Sweet getting the Cannonball Barrage completely nerfed out of the ground. But basically what teams were doing was the Cannonball Barrage had limitless range, and they were 2 tanking parts of the dungeon and Cannonball Barraging a lot of the trash. 80% of the count in this key or something.
Yeah.
This strat relied on swapping out to a tank after the first boss, which you can't do during cup play, but you can do during time trials. So that it was an interesting part of it, but they nerfed the cannon barrage after this, so it doesn't. And you'll notice this in your own keys, of course, or reading the patch notes. It doesn't work anymore. You can't cannon any mobs anymore. Very sad.
What was interesting about it was the cannons would not hit the first area of the dungeon, so you had to do the first boss in some manner and survive. Which, like, surviving the first boss on Tyrannical 28 and beyond is very, very difficult. And so, like, we had groups doing 5 tanks on that boss, I think.
Oh my god, is that Smack?
5 tanks.
Is that this group here?
Yeah.
The NA group doing the 5 tanks on that
or whatever.
That is so cool. I love that.
There's a clip of Hopeful's team, because I think that there was like a couple of teams that were streaming. There's like a Chinese team that I saw was streaming. But Hopeful's team was Hopeful's team was the one that I saw streaming the most.
Yeah, that's why you saw a lot of Warrior and Unholy DK as well, because those are very tanky classes and they could live the 29. That was like the first idea of it, and then like on day 3, Warlock started showing up, because Warlock's also extremely tanky and does a lot of single target. And then you just started seeing like more and more tanks. This is unbelievable.
Wow. So this is what they did. They literally just cannonballed the whole dungeon. Everything died.
Yeah, so you get cannon barrage every 20 seconds. So you went to Harlan and you pushed him to P2 as fast as you could. And then everybody left except for one tank. And then every 20 seconds you had to bomb something, basically.
Amazing stratagem. And that of course doesn't work anymore and wouldn't have worked in cups anyways. The other dungeon was the Uldaman. Now this one ended up also being pretty tricky, right? This one was fortified, storming, bursting, and only got done up to 28, right? And it turns out you basically needed you needed a 28 or a very fast 27 to qualify, right? And you guys had a pretty slow 27, right, Terrell?
Yeah, we actually didn't end up getting a 28 at the end of the night, so we didn't quite make it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this dungeon was really hard with some of the strategies that you had to do. So, like, speculatively, everybody was taking all of the lizard trash into third boss, and they were also doing, like, spider plus bats onto Emberon, right? Which the spider bats on the Emberon is not bad, but the overwhelming power lizard
because of bursting. Tough. Bursting was actually incredibly hard on that boss with that pack.
So,
but also I hear Echo. So like the first pull people do in Ultimate, which is like all the way up to the 2 casters, and then sometimes including the Crocs.
Yeah.
Echo and I'm sure a couple other teams were doing all that plus the entire second pull and 1 pull on 28 fort. which is ridiculous.
They did so they went all the way up to the next area of geomancers.
Yeah, so they had like 6 total Crocs and like 5 total casters.
What tank was now playing?
And,
He had to be
4 berserkers, I think.
bear, right?
He was
Yeah,
on
that
DH.
was the bear.
Well, oh wait, okay. They did a 28 with him on DH.
Oh, maybe they did both.
Yeah.
Because
I
I think Nerf like practiced with them while Now was out of town for something, and he was on bear for that. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds. It doesn't sound like there's any tank that would be comfy on, but definitely feels like it would be comfier on bear.
I agree with that. Those are kind of my thoughts too. Wow, holy shit, you did it on Demon Hunter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Wild.
place is nuts. And what's funny about this is that was like the hardest dungeon in the world for a tank player. And then the following week, I pugged a 27 fort, no voice, with the new comp, and it was so it was just like relieving to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We do have a question from Discord from Raccoons Are Cool. It says the qualifier strat of doing freehold with Harlan Sweets Barrage was interesting. How do we feel about interactions like this? Do we think enemy NPCs doing damage to one another is more enjoyable than items doing damage, such as chains in Neltheris or weapons in Necrotic Wake?
Strats like these are garbage. I think that the chains in Neltheris, the fact that they haven't changed those is absolutely absurd. They should have changed this shit weeks ago with Neltheris. I mean, this is something we've been talking about for a while. And strats and dungeons that they make about the gimmick as opposed to about being able to participate in the dungeon is stupid. I hate it.
Yeah,
I agree with all that.
I see the Harlan stuff as pretty similar to like spotters in Siege of Borealis, right? Like he's basically just a bolstered spotter at the end of the dungeon that is blasting the mobs for you.
Yeah, it was actually literally Siege of Borealis, but instead of only going on one player, it went on 3. So you just had triple spotter.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of that either. I'm glad they changed it. I think that it's weird because I liked pulling trash onto the end of Harlan and killing that with the cannons
I like that
as well.
That felt fair. That felt way more fair.
That felt like a good trade-off of risk and reward. The problem is that when chains in Neltheris or cannon barrages and freehold are taken to their logical conclusion, and when they are not balanced with that in mind, the risk and reward stops being reasonable, and it stops being comparable to it stops being a choice of, oh, do we want to potentially save 30 seconds and take on this risk and have this high execution, end of dungeon moment, and it instead becomes like, okay, let's learn how to use these chains to save ourselves 10 minutes, right? And that's I think that sucks.
So, click this link that I had. Since had this tweet whenever we were gone to whenever the Harlan Cannonball Barrage stuff was like super prevalent, and he had this tweet about Neltheris just in particular. This is so stupid. The fact that 42% of your damage done in Neltheris is chains. Like what?
Yeah, this is almost double the amount that actually is more than double the amount of spotter damage that you would do in Siege of Borealis. More than bots in Junkyard, right? More than
Toldagor
cannons, which is wild. It's not.
Almost twice the amount of Toldagor cannons.
Yeah.
It's not even including like some extra stuff you can do with chains. Like you can snap stuff down from the upper level in Neltheris into chains if you really want to. It's really hard. I feel like we're going to see that in TGP a little bit. But even crazier than that, you can explode chains onto the Chargath boss and cleave him with them as well.
I have seen some Wormstone.
Yeah, Wormstone tech.
Yeah,
is available there. So
yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I wish they would see these strats and then nerf the high end of how powerful these sorts of things can be, right? Like if each chain was only usable once instead of by all 5 players, I think that would go a long way. Or if the damage just, was capped at, like, I'm not a huge fan of target caps as a general band-aid solution, but chains seem like a good example of, cap this at 5 or 8 targets or something, or soft cap it or something.
The chains are just giga buggy too, because if you pixel stack them, then they insta tick the whole entire pack and one chain can full clear a pack if you
they do like triple damage.
Yeah, because it's like if the same server tick sees it colliding with multiple targets, it'll cause an explosion at each one, right?
Yeah, well, it'll cause an explosion on each one, which does AOE around it, and it just insta kills the whole pack.
Yeah, so obviously that would be another good thing to fix. Yeah,
very stupid.
Yeah, not especially happy with that in Altheris. But I guess it's probably late to change it now.
That just going to be a giga meme in the MDI or
In
TGP.
TGP, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just
you know
gonna
what?
be like
It still would be good to change that. The best time to change it was 20 weeks ago. The second best time is today. I think it would still be worth to don't do it today, but do it on a weekly reset at some point. That would be good.
I agree.
I think the first time it gets shown on broadcast is like the potential that dungeon
Maybe
it's going to go down.
Maybe we'll see how the reactions end up being.
I mean, it's basically just who can kill Forge Master on the highest level. That's like the entire Nelthar's key.
Yeah, because the timer is if you do the chains all right, the timer is so good, even on pretty much any key level.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we do have a comp question from NotLag in Discord that says, do we think that we'll still see Mage after the nerfs, or are there any sleeper specs lurking? So do we think we will see anything other than the comp Bear, Holy Paladin, Augmentation, Shadow, Mage? Does anybody expect to see any specs other than those at all?
Maybe just some comfort picks.
Yeah, so like we know Greg Push played Ellie Shaman in Trials, so maybe they'll stick with that or do something cool like that.
Would you ever play anything else for Brackenhide? Maybe.
Yeah, or could you ever play DH for like? Is there a better comp for 3-chesting the first keys that you get in the weekend?
Oh, like a Venge instead.
Vengeance for the lower keys or something?
Or Brewmaster. And someone said that in chat, actually.
Yeah, Brewmaster.
That actually would make sense for like the very first key, and that's it.
Yeah, like, but is that even worth like the like? Do you save? I guess if it makes it a 2-chest or 3-chest reliably, that maybe could be good.
Maybe.
I mean, at the high end, I don't think there are sleeper specs lurking, right? But I think it's like.
Yeah,
I think it feels pretty locked in.
I think it would be very hard to get away from this comp because of the fact that like the Augmentation, the Shadow, the Holy Paladin are all kind of reinforcing each other's spot where each of them like you can't pull one of them out without losing a piece of the puzzle, right? So I think it's pretty likely we're going to see this comp.
Maybe the shadow gets lobbed in some of the keys, but like even still, I think their damage is really good. So
yeah,
I think we'll still see some Vengeance too.
Maybe, yeah, maybe some Vengeance.
It's more risky, but it does more damage.
I would only ever see you getting rid of the shadow in lower level keys. Also, I've never see you would never get rid of Fortitude in high level keys. Like, but maybe in something that you're trying to 3-chest, you could.
I think if you're trying to 3-chest, you would play like Disc, right? You'd play like Vengeance, Disc.
Holy Paladin damage is stupid too, though.
Yeah, but like I'm Power Infusion. I don't know. Maybe
double
you can
mage
get away with it.
Double mage effort. I'm in.
Yeah.
Frost and Fire.
Yeah. I don't know. The fact that we're spitballing, like maybe there's a chance you would get rid of this one comp, you're probably still just playing it then.
We'll see. I mean,
most likely, yeah.
Yeah, I think it will be cool to see. I do hope that. Man, I hope they nerf these. I hope they nerf multiple of these specs with some swiftness and but we'll see. I mean, we've got to see what actually happens as well this weekend because there's a chance that there is something that's actually better in a TGP setting. I don't know.
Does H-Pally even need another nerf?
Yeah.
You think? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think another nerf of the same size and maybe we're good for M+. Okay. I do think it's still like clearly the best by a lot, but that's one I'm less confident on than the tanks and the DPS. So if a lot of healers disagree with me on that, then I would maybe yield. But if so, then where are the other healers?
Well, I don't know.
Maybe it takes a little bit of time, but it didn't take a little bit of time at the start for everybody to swap on. So
no, they swapped onto that thing the moment they saw it.
Yeah. All right, well, we have a few more Q&A questions to get to, but first we have to thank our amazing supporters over at the Patreon. Okay, bye. Wait, Tuttles, you looked like you had an interjection or something, but were you just?
No, I don't have an interjection.
Okay, all right.
I'm gonna turn. I need to turn on my lights though.
Okay, all right, that's cool. You do that, and I will read out some of the Patreon names. Good luck. All right, he's on. Let's see if I can beat him. We have. If you had to choose between eating tacos every day or being skinny for life, would you choose hard or soft tacos? That's a good question. The second Tobey Maguire Spider-Man hits harder than I remembered. Never Nude, Ja, King of Skills. This was not even close. He's back way before I could finish. Shadows of Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Chewy. Augmentation Evokers bring the chaos we need in WoW. Okay, back to playing the H-Pal. Salty Senny, ZivXX, Necris, Tankdill, Nevuk. Eevee, Year of the Spear is extended into 2023. Bless up. No Trick, I forgot I was sub-tier. Dymat, Rework Mistweaver. Get in the van, loser. We're doing augmentation stuff. Nyx. Reads Ian Wowhead interview. Oh no, where the tier at again? That's in now. The tier thing is in now, right? Which is good. That's a good change. Gallic, Brusif, Dratnos Abyss. You can fish for Queen Ajara's royal seal. Where can this be done? Like and subscribe if Dratnos gets it right. I want to say this is Dalaran Fountain, one of the coins you can get out of there. I know you can fish a bunch of coins out of there, but I'm not sure. M Sanity, Xena, Rogue's now good enough for Prog, but still bad enough to be sat for SLG. Bless up. Red Color, youtube.com/workbringer. Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Nevermore. Number 1 Simsky for Trelsky. Lurka's back in the States, but was he ever really gone from our hearts? Milk, 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 Milk. Sife, Pone. Windwalker Monks deal with nerfs by rolling with the punches. Windwalker Monks got a 2% buff recently, you'll find. So, in fact, things are going great for Windwalkers.
Only like 10 more of those.
Yep, we're almost there. Thesaurus.com is a powerful tool. The Marsh Hare. Mage Rework Waiting Room. That's an outdated Patreon name. Thank you for listening to the Titanforge podcast, as brought to you by Daddy Dratty, Grampy Trelsky, and the Tettles Effect, TM. Big Head Smallbrain. King's Honor, fellow Horde. It's me, your newest guild member. Juniper. Demo Lock goes Burr. Dorky Guide for Vengeance DH is a vibe. Time to reroll back from DPS again. Dorky also has a Guardian Guide that is out now as well, so if anybody is interested in the Even Fatimer reroll,
it's funny how fast these things keep getting outdated.
Yeah, well, the Vengeance Guide is still good and accurate, but if you're looking for a good Guardian Guide, I recommend that one for keys. They do a really good job of being short and only having the important information. So really good if you already know most of how the spec works to get here's the important stuff to know for this season for this spec. Rat Run, Jato and Honeychunk Forever. Chauncey, that moment when your tank says, now where's my ranged at during Jade Serpent Dragon Boss and bricks your key. Feral Druids in the MDI, you've got to be kidding me. Okay, a couple of ones that are soon going to be very outdated Patreon names. You don't have that yet?
It still can't be as bad as the SLG one.
Yeah, is that gone now?
One's timeless.
I don't see it anymore. Did we?
No, you read it already.
Did I read it already? Okay, good. Oh, phew. Here. Okay, good. I must have just skimmed over it in my head. Whew. The day we lose the rogues are bad enough for SLG, or good enough for Prog, but bad enough to be sat for SLG, that's going to be a sad day.
True.
Sire Dematicus graciously thanks Blizzard for easing back on the Demonology PTR changes. The small mammal living in Dratnos' shirt. Sapphire. Pogmentation evoker buffs make me feel like a real man. Rework DKs, please, Blizzard. I will buy you a pack of gum. Is it me, or is Tettles a real-life Fry from Futurama? Good question. All right, Q&A time. Our first question comes from Twitter. Comes from Twitter and says, should classes still using primordial rings for healing get buffed? Isn't that low-hanging fruit? It's not just buffing those classes. It's you got to nerf the healing of those primordial. They didn't nerf the healing of the healing gems, so they got to do that, right?
Yeah, true. They only hit the damage ones, right?
Yeah, they should compensate with healing buffs for the specs based on how much % healing they lost, sure, but what
is wrong with the Aeronog ring? Why are people still wearing that?
Please
make them take it off.
Yeah,
some classes don't scale with stats. That's why.
No matter how small the proc is, it's hard for it to be less small than 10 eye levels on ring or whatever, or 30 eye levels even on ring. So that's rough.
Yeah, your class is in need of a rework when the Aeronog ring is good and the primordial ring's somehow still good.
Yeah. All right, next question comes from Sicarius that says, how would you guys feel about raid tiers being eye level locked to create an easier environment for balancing? Example, Mythic being 435 eye level max and Heroic being 425 eye level max, whatever's the current eye level at the new tiers. So this is sort of like a challenge mode balancing or whatever, that WoW has had this in the past with challenge mode dungeons. a few problems. There's still a balancing issue of like people start whenever you make the eye level fix, people start optimizing for it in different ways, right? Like you start optimizing number of sockets, you start optimizing weird trinkets in, and those sorts of things. The other problem as well is that your gear getting better each week and making the content easier, I think, is a pretty crucial dynamic to how WoW raids work. And if you put a low item level cap on things, that goes away. I've liked the idea of an eye level cap for like hard mode achievements, or for like you could have a eye level cap that goes up over time over the first few weeks to kind of create like a fixed balancing point for Race to World first without having to rely on later nerfs to make the fights easier. But even that, I'm not sure would be good. And I think Blizzard would be pretty hesitant to do anything like this because the gear bigger gear, better gear, making your character more powerful is a pretty crucial part of like the dopamine that the game gives. And so if you put in a eye level cap, that goes away.
That's the core of an MMO game.
I think that in general it would definitely take away from what makes World of Warcraft with like the gear progression. I do think it'd be kind of interesting for like a hard mode or like a challenge mode situation. But I don't know. Also, whenever we last had the show, they had recently buffed the mega dungeon and they nerfed it like hours after our last show. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the balancing ended up being, I think, reasonably good for it. Still pretty tough for casual players to get through Mythic.
I've seen a lot of people talking about how it's too hard, and then I don't understand. I don't get it. Is it actually that hard for casuals? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, like if you're playing it, down 30 eye levels on us, and also down like all of the coordination or whatever, like yeah, it's a lot trickier than I
guess
regular Mythic dungeon.
Well, they give you that alert.
That's true. It's like how you have to type advanced before you create an evoker, right? Like that. It lets you know. What's happening.
Was that?
I forgot
about
that.
Got it. Yeah. I was about to make an NPC joke, but I will refrain.
Oh,
dude, I can't believe he said that. I still can't believe he said that.
The discourse has been especially good recently. I will say, tinfoil hat theory, I'm just saying, the same time Twitter started paying out based on engagement, we started seeing some takes that started getting an awful lot of quote retweets. So I'm just saying, by participating in that, you might be financially rewarding the exact takes that you're trying to dunk on.
Yeah.
All right, next question comes from CatGay in Discord that says, secret dungeon tech predictions for TGP. Not so secret, but mine would be Prot Warrior for Neltslair, Reflect City.
You can reflect Neuraxis.
You can reflect that, which is good. There's a couple of, you can reflect Chain Lightning in Vortex Pinnacle, last boss as well. Even if you're not the target, you can go in the circle and reflect the Chain Lightning.
Yeah. The only problem with that, I think if we see Prot Warrior at all, it'll only be in Atharian Slayer. It's impactful enough to make up for the bad effects that Prot Warrior brings in there, like just needing healing a lot. I don't think it's worth in the other dungeons, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, the big problem is you have to play Prot Warrior for the rest of the dungeon where you could be playing Bear. And so it's hard for a few reflects to overcome that gap. But I do think it's cool.
It depends on what you're talking about in regards to tech, right? Like, are you talking about like class tech, or are you talking about like just general dungeon tech?
Right. I guess it's a question of like, is this enough? Like, is the tech, oh, we're going to play a Prot Warrior in this dungeon because of the reflect? Or is the tech, oh, if you're playing a Prot Warrior, you can reflect this? Because there's a lot of cool stuff that Prot Warriors can reflect this season. It's just, I don't know. It's hard to justify playing them for the whole dungeon.
Yeah.
All right, our final question comes from Keeping It Surreal. Which specs and classes do we think need reworked the most desperately? We've already answered Hunter. I would stick with that answer, though, from earlier, I think.
I think Hunter is probably number one for me as well.
Rogue has had a promised rework that got delayed. So, but aside from Hunter and Rogue, any other specs that we want to identify as being
Shaman? I could say,
yeah.
It's like I don't think they need a rework. I think they need a raid buff, right?
Yeah. I think, honestly, Devastation feels a little bit empty as a spec as well. I feel like it's missing like one interesting rotational hook going on to add some more gameplay to it. I mean, maybe that's part of the. Maybe it's weird because counterintuitively, like Evoker, you have to type advanced when you make an Evoker, but Devastation and Augmentation are like two of the simplest specs out there right now. So
Yeah.
and maybe that's just fine. Maybe that's the goal. Devastation is pretty fun. I play it quite a bit, but I think that it could use one more like thing that you think about when playing it.
I'd love to see Windwalker and Brew
Yeah.
reworks. I think
Monk
they
class
are
tree.
very clunky.
Monk class tree in general, I think could use some rethinking of making the capstones actually cool. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well,
Yeah, I think that's all I have. Yeah, because I think that Hunter is the one that's like in the most dire straits for one.
yeah.
I would do a raid buff rework.
Yes. Yeah.
Will you accept that? Will you accept
Oh,
that
yeah.
answer? Like a full raid buff rework? I feel like that's the one I would like hit.
Like a
Let's
philosophical
reduce
raid buff
the,
redesign. Yeah.
Yes.
There's like 13 required slots in a raid right now or something like that. Like, let's reduce that by a lot, please.
Like make it so that there's like a certain amount of total raid buffs, and then every class brings one, and then every spec brings like a different, and you can pick one to do or something, and you know, you make it so that there's like good reasons to bring each one, but not like as long as you don't stack 20 of the same spec, you're pretty likely to have good coverage of everything.
God, dude, if we ever got a developer interview ever, that would be a great question to ask. Is why didn't they change? Why haven't?
Well,
or like, what are their thoughts on raid buffs? And like,
yeah, I mean, they get asked that question a lot, but
Yeah.
we don't like the answer. We hope they change their minds.
yeah.
All right, well, that's going to be it for us this week. We'll be back next week with another dungeon episode. We'll talk about TGP and stuff. We'll talk about the, how augmentation worked out in TGP and everything. But for now, that is going to be it. Later, gamers.
Later.